Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome all of you to this very value-packed session today. I believe we have parents, young people, and coaches, therapists, practitioners in reflection, and also those who are curious about child development, adolescent development, and parenting here. So I would like to warmly welcome all of you to this value-packed session today. So we are here to discuss the professional coaching, how professional coaching enables the mental and emotional health of both the parents as well as the children, as well as the adults. So it's a very interesting topic, especially if you're parents, if you have been parents, you know what kind of challenge it is. So before I introduce our esteemed panel, I would like to thank all of you for being here. If you are a parent, it means that you are very mindful about your child's growth, your children's growth. And if you are a practitioner in reflection as a therapist, a professional coach, a counselor, or any other spectrum, that also means that you are truly committed to your professional development as well as creating the value and impact your clients seek from seeking out for your practice. So with that, I would like to commend all of you spending this time. It is such an honor to have all of you with us. I am Fernando Hettiadra, founder of Ignite Global and several other organizations dedicated to reflection, psychedelics, and consciousness. And Ignite Global is an ICF accredited specialized coach education provider. In other words, we help individuals, professionals to become amazing reflective practitioners and achieve higher credentials and create a practice, serve clients, serve organizations. And I think one of the things I forgot to mention is that there must also be educators in this space. So if you are an educator, sorry about missing that out. If you are an educator that also speak for the excellence that you are looking to create in your students' lives and their development. So with that, I would like to welcome all of you to share this space with us. I would appreciate if you can keep your microphones muted. Feel free to turn on your camera and show us your emotions. When we work with children, adolescents, and parents, and especially when we deep dive into who we are, emotions play a very important, crucial role. And when we interact with each other, when we see each other, we create psychological safety. So if you would like to, feel free to bring your camera on, interact with each other. And also use the chat room to share your background. If you have a LinkedIn account, if you have any other professional networks, feel free to share them with a brief introduction to who you are, so that if there are colleagues and other individuals and professionals who are interested in joining you and connecting with you, they will be able to do that. And also, as we continue this session today, it is a 60-minute session. If you have any questions, feel free to send them in the chat room. Depending on the relevance and how much time we have, we will try to address them. So once again, thank you very much for spending this time with Ignite Global. I am based in Bangkok, Thailand, and it is dark and it's already 9:34 in the evening here. And I believe many of you are joining from around the world. So let me officially say good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So this is at Ignite Global. We are truly global. We always have a global audience. And just by looking at the profile pictures, some of you, we notice that we are a truly global audience. So with that, it is my responsibility now to introduce to the panelists. So as we begin, I would like to first do a very brief introduction to each panelist, and then I would like to invite our panelists to also do a short introduction of themselves. So I hear someone speaking. There you are. All right, muted. Please note that this is being recorded and this will be shared publicly via our professional and social networks. So starting with our first panelist, Lux Hettiadra. Lux is the creator of ICF Accredited Child Adolescent Development and Parenting Professional Coaching Mastery Certification. And let me invite all of you to keep your microphones muted so we have no interruptions. All right. So with that, and also Lux is a child development specialist who has done a lot of research around the subject. And of course, she's a professional child adolescent development coach. Coming to you in a minute, Lux, for your introduction. And then next, I would like to introduce to you Patrick 𝐻𝐿𝐲𝐚, who is an expert hypnotherapist and a professional child adolescent development coach who has his own practice. And then thirdly, I would like to introduce to you Victoria, who is a neurodiversity specialist, and she works with children, young people, and individuals, also families. She represents Diverse Mind Coach, her own practice. So with that, let me first invite Victoria to introduce herself from her own words.
Hey guys, I recognise quite a few faces, which is always lovely. Great to see you this evening. So I'm based in Dubai, and I have a varied background, but what's most relevant to this is I worked in education for 25 years, and a lot of that I worked in inclusion, and I have a master's in psychology from when I graduated many, many years ago. And recently I set myself up as the Diverse Mind Coach, and I work mainly with families who have neurodivergent family members. Sometimes everybody in the family is neurodivergent, and I work closely with schools and a lot of collaboration between families and the school, and making sure that both parents and the child are working together rather than just working with one of them, because that approach for me is what makes what I do successful. If I work with just one or the other, it's doesn't have the same impact. So I'm happy to see all you guys tonight. My background is relational neuroscience, so that will be coming up a lot in the responses that I give.
Brilliant, Victoria. It's such an honor to have you in this space with your very sound background. So very excited to hear your insights during this session. With that, I would like to invite Patrick to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with you all this evening for me, because I am also in Thailand, in northern Thailand, in Chiang Mai. So I'm called the expat hypnotherapist, and as the name kind of gives away, I tend to focus on working with expats and their families. I apply hypnotherapy through an ACT lens, which is acceptance and commitment therapy. And I do this mainly to help people with some of their stress and their anxiety, to modify some of their behaviors if they'd like to. And it goes all the way through to parenting, so people are able to regulate themselves and co-regulate with their children. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So I've been an expat for 30 years, and after a particularly difficult transition, I leaned into mental health and hypnotherapy because it was really helpful for my family and I as we made a difficult transition because of some violence. And there are some specific kinds of issues that affect expats. And I think we'll talk a little bit about that today. But yeah, I think that's enough about me. Thank you,
Brilliant,
Fernando.
Patrick. With such experience you have, and also the transitions that you have been through, I have many very curious questions that I look forward to hear your insights, Patrick. So thank you very much for being here and sharing both your own personal experiences as well as a practitioner, your experiences. Thank you. So Lux, over to you.
Thank you, Fernando. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this session. I am so deeply grateful to be able to take part in this discussion, highly appreciated by parents, educators, and professionals like you working with children and their families. And it is an honor to collaborate with my colleagues and all our participants today. Now, I know Fernando introduced me, so I'm not going to talk about myself. Some of you already know me very well, and if you are interested to know more about me, you can always find out who I am and what I do. Instead, I thought as we begin this discussion, I want to share some eye-opening research data released by the Royal Foundation for Centre for Early Childhood Development, initiated by the Princess of Wales, Kate Middleton. The statistics indicate that public understanding of child development which shows around 1 in 3, about 36% adults reporting only report knowing just a little bit or nothing about how children develop, especially in their early childhood. Now, I know that I'm sharing statistics numbers, but I think these are more than numbers, and I think it's important to recognize the major concern that lack of understanding among who we are, parents, educators, and those who are involved working with children and adolescents can have a significant impact on their lifelong development. And that's why at Ignite Global, we are taking this initiative to create awareness about these crucial topics. So thank you for being here. Let's begin the conversation.
Brilliant, Lux. Thank you very much for those very eye-opening statistics, very valuable, because usually when we look at a number, we just look at it as a number, but we need to keep in mind these numbers actually represent us, represent our family, the people that we really love. And sometimes one of the things as a reflective practitioner I often say is, what we don't know, we just don't know, right? So being here, you are creating that awareness for yourself, and that would mean that you can help someone. You can actually maybe even save someone's life. So we truly appreciate your presence being here and co-creating this space with us. So those who are joining a few minutes later, I would like to reiterate our topic today: the impact of parental mental and emotional health on child development from a professional coaching lens. So probably you might even be thinking as much as what is parental mental and emotional health, what is professional coaching, and how does that play a role? Because I also believe if you are not from a coaching background, you might also have seen many misconceptions about coaching. Often there's a lot of influencers and people who like to preach, speak in front of a camera and on social media. Everywhere you see people giving advice, and often they call themselves as coaches, but we need to keep in mind that is influencing, that is sharing some knowledge, kind of like self-help. Coaching is entirely different practice. It's one of the most beautiful practices that one could use for their personal, professional, and even spiritual evolution. At Ignite Global, we dedicate to this profession. We dedicate ourselves to this profession where we can bring about transformation, change, expansion without giving advice, without telling parents, children what to do. So you're going to hear a lot about how this approach works as our experts will be talking to you. Once again, experts, thank you for being here. And as Luke's shared some statistics, I would also like to share a few insights, especially from a lens of do you know, right? So I would like to invite you to think about, you know what DNA is, you know what your genome is, you know how our DNA, our genome control us or to make us who we are. Do you know that parental stress can alter a child's DNA? Did you ever think that you can influence your child's DNA? The research says so. You can influence your child's DNA. Another one, do you know parenting style can physically change child's brain and the brain development? So we are talking about physiologically, quite literally, changing the neurology of our child's brain. Have you thought about it? The research says so. Another one, often when we think about primary caregivers, we often bring our attention to the mother. And we often also believe that mother's mental health is absolutely important for the child's growth and child's mental and emotional well-being. Do you know, as much as mother's mental health is important, also the father's mental health is absolutely important, and if it affects the child's development as much as the mother, right? So if we look into the research, there are so many mind-blowing factors. And now we are going to learn some great insights and explore some great ideas from our panelists. Also, at the same time, I would also like to make a shout out to Dr. Denise Leville, and she was supposed to be here with us today. She's a clinical child psychologist and also professional child adolescent development coach. Unfortunately, she is not feeling well. So we send you, Denise, all our good wishes and hope you feel better. So with that, let's dive in. So of course, we have a very, very important question waiting, right? Now, this is parent focus today. More than child development, adolescent development, we want to address it from the parent side, especially the parents' mental and emotional health, because I believe, and I think you will agree with me very easily, that bringing up a child is one of the most difficult jobs and one of the jobs that is overlooked and devalued. If you're a parent, you would be agreeing with me, right? So with that, I would like to invite our panelists. Let's begin with Patrick, since Patrick himself is a parent. Patrick, what are some common but often overlooked mental and emotional health challenges contribute to parents' stress particularly?
Okay, so there's a long list that we could go over. One that's pretty obvious to most parents is just like being exhausted, either from doing the work or from being exhausted from choice. But that's pretty obvious. Let's go to something that might be a little bit more specific to a group like this. Perfectionism, wanting to get it right, wanting to make sure that you're doing the right thing for your kids. Wanting to get it right, it's nice. It's good to be aware, but you have to hold on to some of these things a little bit more loosely, because actually, paradoxically, being so concerned about getting it right puts you in a position of being stressed and getting it wrong. And sometimes that reflection also goes on your children, where you're like, oh my, I've done all these things. I should be behaving the way, Lux told me to do it this way. That bald guy told me to do it the other way, and so I expected my kid was going to be happy, and now they're not happy. So then you can have that perfectionism also projected onto that child and make certain kinds of emotions not okay. Right? So that's something that you have to be aware of. Just kind of hold on to some of your ideas loosely. And then the last thing I would say about this right now, for my particular specialty for working with expats, loneliness and identity are two of these really big issues. And you can think about this, if you're taken from Kyrgyzstan and put in Haiti, as one person who I know was facing, you're going to be not only in a different culture, but you're going to be away from your main advisors, your friends, and your family for raising your children. That idea creates so much stress, so much uncertainty, and that can be passed on to the children as well. And we'll talk about that for sure. But also, as an expat, you often don't have, let me make sure my time here. You also don't have, identity can sometimes be an issue. Your kids go to school, they're the students. If you're the primary parent and the stay-at-home, the parent goes to work and they're the worker bee. Who are you? That also increases your stress level. And so these are the kinds of things that we tend to have to address in order to be, on your game as a parent, holding it lightly, but doing your best.
Thank you, Patrick. I think a very valuable insight right there, right? Like with this perfectionism, for an example, your very first insight, how we transfer it to our child, and how as a parent we started to become a perfectionist, probably that could go back to our childhood, and also starting to recognize that certain tendencies like procrastination, for an example, fear of rejection, fear of failure, and then perfectionism, all of that could be stemmed from the childhood, and then it influenced us, and then we influence our children. And another thing that you mentioned very powerful is the loneliness. I think with that brings me to an important question, because you're talking about everything from a coaching lens. I would like to invite Lux as an expert in the field and also as an educator for child, adolescent development and parenting coaches. Lux, how does the loneliness and receiving coaching or working with the coach as a unit, as a family unit, could support, adding to Patrick's sharing?
Thank you, Fernando, for that question. And also, Patrick, thank you for your insight. And this is something that I very often see in parents being lonely. And when you come to think of parenting, it's not that we receive parenting knowledge or we have parenting experience before we become a parent. Most of us just get into the game as we become parents. So most of us don't really know what we do. And when we say loneliness, it's not just the isolation from the society, but also not understanding if they are doing the right thing, not being able to make those right decisions for their children, because we know that at the beginning of every new phase of our life, we are in a place that we have never been before. So imagine when it's applied to parenting and the development of the child, this can be extremely damaging. So Fernando, connecting the dots where when parents feel lonely, how coaching can support is that one of the things my parenting clients very often tell me is that, looks, I can breathe as a parent and someone will judge me for it. Now, when you think about it, coaches, in our society, we are very quick, very easy. We provide advice to our parents, or you should do this, you should do that. And if you really come to think of it, most of these advices are often unsolicited. So we don't really know what we are also talking about, but we offer this advice, hoping that it's going to make a difference in the parent's life. So when we look at working with a parent working with a coach, the difference is here, rather than offering these predetermined solutions or advice that might not work for that parental unit, a coach helps the parent to come out of that situational problem, whatever that they are facing, to come out and create that real connection where they are provided a safe, supportive environment for them to discuss their deepest vulnerabilities, insecurities, emotional challenges, and so on, so that it takes that loneliness or the burden away, because no longer they feel like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where I'm heading with my child. And especially coming back to what Patrick mentioned earlier, in African culture, we know that it is said it takes a village to raise a child. But if you look at our world, what has happened to our world is the world is a very small place. We travel all the time, and this means we are also separated and rooted from our own family environments, and we live in these new environments feeling so lonely, not knowing how to cultivate, how to develop those healthy social interactions. So yeah, that's my take on that, Fernando.
Thank you very much, Lux. I think you are reiterating something very important, because often in the society, coaching is seen as a practice where the expert will be providing solutions and telling people what to do, and often they are unsolicited. But in this case, you are starting to recognize that this is not coaching. What we are doing here is providing some guidelines, ideas, and knowledge sharing session. But if you're sitting with a coach, especially if you're unaware of how coaching works, you will find out that coach holds a space for the client, in this case, parent and the family unit, including the children, to find their own solutions, providing them that space without making any judgments, in a way that they feel supported and validated, which is supporting this isolation, loneliness that Patrick was talking about. And now I think since we have Victoria here, she comes from a very specific background. And this is where the value that we can create, looking beyond what we know as the norm. Now, the thing is, when we say the norm, often we try to put ourselves in a box. But at the same time, we need to recognize that we as human beings, we are absolutely diverse. We have many different needs. We have many different ways of facing the world. We have many different structure in our body. Although we all tend to have the similar brain, there are many neurological differences. There are physiological differences to who we are. So when it comes to that, it's a very important question that we recognize, going beyond just a norm, really looking at everyone in an inclusive space, recognizing that we have different needs, we have different ways of approaching certain things, and we are all special in our own right. So with that, I would like to invite Vicky. Vicky, since you come from a neurodivergent background, can you please help us understand what does neurodivergence mean in children?
Thank you, Fernando. So, we were talking briefly before the event about how best to introduce us. And one of the things we're talking about is who do I work with? And I think you just kind of repeated the word there that I would explain. I work with human beings. So that means everybody. So neurodiversity itself is, it's like, if you think of it like biodiversity, biodiversity is essential for the planet. We need the whole variety. We have independence. We have ways of interacting that require the full range of biodiversity in our world. And it's true, the same with neurodiversity. And two things to focus on in that area. First of all, in terms of the biological way that we work, in terms of the way our brains communicate, in terms of the neurotransmitters and the networks of nervous system, neurons and things, we all work in the same way. But we're also, the second part of that is we're also hugely unique. In that nobody experiences the world in exactly the same way. The way their brain processes that information differs, but the mechanics of it are very similar. So I work with relational neuroscience, so nervous system regulation and dysregulation. So when we're talking about neurodivergent families, and basically neurodivergence, if you're not familiar with the term, is people whose brains don't work in the expected societal norm, the neurotypical way, and they process the information that they receive in through all their different senses a little bit differently. They may be dyslexic, they may be dyscalculic, they may be dyspraxic, they may be autistic, they may be identified as having ADHD, all of these things that are seen as not the typical way of processing the world. So that's how you would define neurodivergency. But for me, it comes back to that relational neuroscience again. And I think what we find with neurodivergent individuals is that their nervous systems are generally working at a baseline threshold that is higher than many other people's, so they're more quickly likely to become dysregulated. It's that idea that some of you may be familiar with. I mean, it's a very British thing, but I suspect it's familiar in other cultures as well, of the canary in the coal mine. That somebody who is neurodivergent is like the canary in the coal mine. Now, if you don't know, back during the mining heyday in the UK, they used to take a little yellow bird that's known as a canary in English down into the coal mine in a cage. And I'm an animal lover, so I don't advocate this. But if that poor little canary at some point flipped on its back with its legs up in the air, it told the coal miners that there was potentially toxic gas in the coal mine and they needed to get out. So for me, it's that same idea with neurodivergent people. They're that canary. They're the ones who sense in their environments the threats to their nervous system. They pick up on those sensory overload. They pick up on the little things that most people would probably ignore or just cope with. And they respond to those in ways which is quite uncomfortable for them and can lead to significant dysregulation and stress inside their nervous systems, which eventually, if that becomes chronic enough and isn't responded to appropriately, then leads to burnout. And that happens to adults and children. And with a lot of the families that I work with, that's a very familiar scenario. So a lot of the time when I'm coaching, I'm getting the people that I work with to reflect on what might be behind some of those behaviors, which are the external expressions of what's going on internally, and to think about, so what has happened to the nervous system that is causing this behavior to come out in this way. The nervous system has two states. It has protection mode and connection mode, and Luke's covered the connection mode. She was talking about, you know, how important it is to have that connection. And that's, I don't know, some of you are probably familiar with Stephen Porges. He talks about how connection is absolutely vital. And in expat communities, that is often, as Patrick identified, something that we're lacking. And without that connection, our nervous systems don't regulate. And it's the same whether you're neurodivergent or not. But if you are neurodivergent, everything is heightened and emphasized and exaggerated. So I hope that kind of, a lot to say, but I'll be quiet there.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for going a bit deeper, Victoria, and helping us understand. especially when we talk about individuals' mental and emotional states, the regulation and dysregulation, the activation of regulation and dysregulation is how important it is, and also how unique we are in terms of how we regulate. Although we have all the hardware within us very similar, the way they react and act are very different, including how all the electromagnetic movement and all the chemical messengers like hormones and different types of neurotransmitters play a role in our behavior, thinking, and feeling. Thank you very much, Victoria. All right, so I think as we are continuing this journey in this conversation, it is so very important for us to recognize that our experiences shape us to be who we are today. Often we feel like that we are one unit. Often we feel like that we have full control over what we do. But the deeper you go, the more you realize that we are actually strongly conditioned. And also, oftentimes when we act or react in a specific way, let's say, especially if it is a reaction that you didn't like in a specific social situation, you reacted to something, maybe there was certain temperament. You go back home and you think, I shouldn't have reacted like that. That is not like me. That is not my essence. And then you wonder, sometimes we even beat ourselves up thinking, why did I act like that? Often we don't have an answer to it. It's because we are starting to recognize that when we react to a certain situation, there are internal alignments, almost unconscious alignments or conditioning, if not responses, that show up based on the stimuli that was presented to. In that case, it may be a heated argument. During this heated argument, there was a trigger that alert us to act in response to that trigger. So it can be either fighting or it can be flight, which is a response of our amygdala, for an example. So in other words, we are recognizing that there are certain responses that are within us that condition us to behave in a specific way. And these are called trauma responses. For an example, because of the traumatic experiences that we have been exposed to growing up, all of a sudden, as an adult or any stage of our life, we behave in a specific way. Let me give an example. Think about a person, an adult, who is terrified about tiny little pet dog. When they see a pet dog, they freeze, right? They freeze, they become immobile. This is freeze response if you look at it from the trauma perspective. And what this potentially indicate is that maybe as a child or an adolescent, the person may have been attacked by a dog, for an example. At that time, we recognize the danger and our amygdala, our fight and flight response, the emotional response center, encoded that in our brain. So we respond to that specific trigger, which is the dog in this case, maybe a pet dog. We can tell the person 100 times, you don't have to be afraid of a little dog. It's a pet dog, it's harmless. The person knows consciously, but they have this strong response that is coming out of them because of the threat is present. In other words, this response, the freeze response, immobilization actually is a trauma response and it is unconscious. Now, speaking of trauma, very often children are so vulnerable to trauma. In the US, Center for Disease Control and Prevention conducted a study focusing on 17,000 people in a Caucasian neighborhood, which is considered as a privileged environment. So this is not even an underprivileged environment. So you can imagine then if you compare privileged and underprivileged environment, how prone they are to trauma. And they particularly focused on people with difficulties, mental, emotional, also physical health, mental, emotional, physical difficulties. And they ask about childhood experiences, especially childhood adverse experiences, right? We call them ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. Some of them are as simple as emotional neglect, physical neglect, missing out certain nurturing and care, or missing out the security need, sometimes physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. Emotional abuse can be as simple as bullying. Sexual abuse can be, it's never as simple as, but sometimes we normalize, generalize. I think I used the wrong word. Sometimes we look at something and we say, oh, it's just only a little touch. It shouldn't be such a big problem. But we don't understand how it affects a child. So we consider it as sexual abuse. Now, what I'm really trying to say here is the statistics that came out. Do you know, so few of them, right? Emotional neglect, physical neglect, emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse. These are ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. Do you know as an adult, if they could recall 4 ACEs, 4 adverse childhood experiences, they have a much higher possibility or potential or prevalence to develop uh, depressive disorders, anxiety disorders, and substance abuse like smoking, alcohol abuse, and drug abuse. And let me move forward a little bit. If an adult who has experienced 6 or more ACEs, adverse childhood experience, do you know that the research shows that there's a great possibility that their lifespan is reduced by 19 to 20 years. So we are starting to recognize what a strong impact the trauma creates in us. So with that, I would like to invite 𝐿𝐿𝐿 to share a little bit about what is childhood trauma and how do they relate to parental, emotional, and mental health particularly. Over to you, 𝐿𝐿𝐿.
Thank you, Fernando. And of course, as you can see, that this is a complex area. And also at this point, I would like to trigger warn our participants, because as you can see that we are diving deeper into this topic, addressing childhood trauma, and we all have been children. We might not remember what happened to us, but it doesn't mean that it didn't happen. So as we discuss some of these things, if any triggers show up, please take precautions and take care of yourself, so that we don't unnecessarily rock any boats. So as you know that it's childhood trauma, we can talk about all day long, but I will try to simplify it as much as I can and keep it brief, because Fernando, I feel you already provided a lot of context to the topic that we are addressing. Now, when we look at childhood trauma in simple terms, what it refers to is the stressful or harmful experiences that impact the child's brain development, overwhelming their ability to cope and function normally. And like Fernando mentioned, this can include abuse, it can be neglect, losing a parent, or living in a home with constant conflict or mental health struggles. Sometimes as parents, we have our certain mental health struggles, and that can cause trauma to our children. Now, the interesting thing here about trauma, often when we think of trauma, we imagine being physically or sexually assaulted or something that happens to us in extreme situations, for example, like in war, which is true. This is one type of trauma. However, what we don't realize and where the danger lies is that even less obvious situations, like, for example, feeling emotionally ignored, it could be due to the parental mental health issues, or it could be the parent, they are traveling for work, or it could be that there is a separation in the family. Whatsoever the reason, when the child feels emotionally neglected, or even, like, let's say, constantly criticized, right? For example, if you just look at maybe the households that you grew up or your social circles, you will see that sometimes we are constantly being criticized by our parents, even humiliated in front of others. And we are compared to one another. Oh, you need to be like this, you need to be like that, you need to be this, you need to be that. If you are not at this age, but you are achieving this, you are nobody. So we receive a lot of this kind of information, and what we don't realize is our day-to-day life. So trauma can be woven into our day-to-day life. Fernando, you mentioned about ACEs, so I'm not going to repeat that, but it's so true that research on ACEs that shows it's more traumatic events the child experiences, the higher risk for mental health issues like anxiety, even depression, as well as physical health problems later in life. So obviously, what a parent go through as a child is going to show up in their adult life, which is then going to influence how they interact and build relationship with their child, which then can cause another level of trauma to their children, which then we look at generational trauma. This is what I always mention in our classes, that sometimes parenting can be like pass the parcel game. If you have passed it, if you have played it, it's like we pass this parcel from one generation to another without really taking the time to open this parcel and see, hey, wait a second, what is in this parcel that I am passing to my child unknowingly, unintentionally, all that generational trauma that's been passed down to us, not just by our actions, but also through genetics, like Fernanda mentioned earlier, that trauma can be passed to our children through genes. So we keep on passing this parcel. And I also want to combine coaching here. What happens when a parent start working with coach? In my personal experience, one of the very first things, one of the most profound things that happen is that the moment after a few sessions they start working, the more they go deep dive into their self, they realize they have so much to heal from their childhood. And they also realize the more they heal themselves, the better their parenting journey becomes.
Thank you for such a rich explanation, Lux. I think it provides us a lot of insights into who we are and how we are molding our children or nurturing our children and how it can be empowered. Thank you. So with that, Patrick, I would like to bring your attention, as you have a lot of experience living as an expat. You have a name for it, right? Expat dad. So I'm curious to learn based on your experiences, especially yourself as well as your clients. We are all aware that the child's environment plays a huge role. And now that we are living in a fast-paced world, as the world becomes a global village, there's a lot of frequent relocations and a lot of cultural transitions that take place. I would like to understand, Patrick, from your experience, how do these elements play a role in parents and children?
So I love listening to you all speak because you guys are just speaking my language. So before I answer your question, I want to make sure that everyone understands something, that generally, as kids that grow up abroad, they look back and they say they had a really valuable experience. They seem to be more flexible. They have a broad world view. They're really empathic. They tend to be high achievers. Okay? Let's keep that in mind first before I tell you the other part of this, which is that unfortunately, we can see that some of these numbers don't lie. Again, looking at ACE scores, that we can see that parental mental health, unfortunately, it tends to be twice as bad as their domestic counterparts. Emotional abuse and emotional neglect is 3 to 4 times higher amongst expat kids or third culture kids than their domestic counterparts. Now, and as a result, really talking about ACE scores, these are the main drivers of their ACE scores being higher than average. You know, we kind of look at this like if you have an ACE score of 4, that it tends to become more and more of an issue, that you have some physical issues later that come in, and some mental health concerns. Well, if we look at that number of 4, we would say that depending on which country we're looking at, the population tends to have between 9 and 16% of that population has 4 or more. No? Okay. So then we look at the expat population for the kids, and they report something like 21%. So that's a significant jump. And unfortunately, the more kids move, those higher those scores get. It gets, if you've had like 10 or more moves, the score becomes 33% of that population tends to have 4 or more. And so it has this whole knock-on effect. The idea here is that when you're getting into this kind of situation, that you just have to really focus. What the first thing you want to focus on, it might be anti-intuitive, like, oh, I want to focus on the kids. The main thing you want to focus on first is being able to regulate yourself as a parent. as you're going abroad. Because, as we go abroad and we have all these unique stimuli that's making our baseline higher because we're dealing with a lot of change, we tend to become dysregulated more often. The more we're able to look at our own self-care, the more we're able to then go and be emotionally available for our kids, have a validating environment as we've moved them from having a whole different social environment as well. So the point being that there's a lot of movement. And generally, kids say, they seem to be more flexible, more creative thinkers. They tend to be independent more early. There's a lot of good that's along with that. And parents, if you can keep yourselves healthy and focus on that, including things like just having your exercise, your nutrition, your proper sleep, being able to do active stress management, being able to connect with other humans well, that you can create that kind of environment of safety for your children so you can be the safe home base away from home as you take your kids to different parts of the world. Okay, so get a lot of positive from going abroad, but there is a lot of risk, or let's say a lot of risk. There's risk, and so if your focus on yourself, making sure that you're healthy, you're going to be more and more likely to be able to create that safe base at home. That answer your question?
Brilliantly. Thank you. Thank you for providing such a balanced answer. And also, Patrick, not only the challenges, but also the regulation techniques. Really appreciate that. So with that, let's bring Victoria's attention back again. So Victoria, since you come from this very specific specialization, we also would like to hear your insights on what are some of the specific emotional, mental challenges, specifically parents' experience of neurodivergent children.
Thank you, Fernando. So I think, again, like my previous answer, it encompasses everything that all parents experience, but there are additional stresses as well, especially in some locations around the world. I think I've been in Dubai a long time, so I see some of those cultural differences, but I'm from the UK originally. And in the UK, the stresses are more around trying to get the support that you have a right to, because in the UK, everything is provided by the government through your taxes and other payments that you make. And every child has a right to education, and every child has a right to healthcare and the support that they need in the system. In Dubai, and I'm guessing in many other expat locations, while Dubai likes to hold itself up as being what they call people of determination friendly, they are to an extent, but everything falls back on the parents. So there's two slightly different things going on for families there. First, in the UK, I think because of that, and I'm sure in other countries, I know where you have to work with the government rather than having the choice to do it yourself, there's often a lot of advocacy that comes into it, and you have to set yourself up in quite a knowledgeable position in order to be able to advocate for your child, understand what their legal rights are. And that can be a huge stress on a neurodivergent parent, and is something that a neurotypical parent might not experience. And I think a lot of what goes along with being a neurodivergent parent is that chronic stress, which is experienced by neurotypical parents, but is experienced at a higher level, because for many neurodivergent children, they have nervous systems which we've spoken about are much more vulnerable. So their behavior can often be much harder to deal with in terms of it being confusing and much more demanding on the parent's time and the parent's own emotions. So the parent will often find themselves in a chronically stressed state themselves, which leads to nervous system dysregulation. And actually, as you were saying before, that impacts the actual neurology of their brains, how their brains are structured. It affects how the limbic system is able to process the world. The limbic system is always on high alert and looking out for dangers, that kind of hypervigilance that palpable, like, like that little meerkat head going around, always on the lookout for danger. And also the prefrontal cortex, where a lot of our higher level thinking, our critical thinking goes on, and our time management and recalling of, the things that we need to do during the day, that also gets very affected by stress. So parents are kind of in, neurodivergent parents, but parents in general are kind of in that catch-22 situation, where the more they try to do, the more they try to parent the challenges that they have to deal with every day, their own nervous system dysregulation and mental health takes a big hit. So I think that's a huge thing for neurodivergent parents. For neurodivergent parents, they often have to deal with the grief of having a child with additional needs, maybe a child that they didn't expect, and their parenting journey can be very different from the one that they envisaged. From the cultural and generational perspective, they're often dealing with other family members who are quite dismissive of their child's needs and will often tell them, no, your child's just badly behaved. They don't have ADHD. They don't have autism. They're just manipulating you with their meltdowns. They're not really, that it's not something that's a problem in their nerve. It's not something that's a problem within them. It's a problem that you as a parent have created. And I think that can be devastating for parents. And I think a lot of the parents that I work with, and time again, I get this with a lot of the families that come to me, is they're just so emotionally wrung out. They don't feel like they have any support. They don't feel anybody understands them. Sometimes even within their own families, like their spouse might not always understand them. The teachers at school can often turn it around onto them, and they just feel very, very persecuted is not the right word, but they feel very attacked from every direction. And on top of that, they're often dealing with a child who has challenging behaviours, maybe doesn't sleep a lot, so they don't get a lot of sleep, which again is a parenting thing. But all of these are at the higher level when you're talking about a child who's neurodivergent. I think something that's worth keeping in mind is that neurodivergence is also genetic. So very, very frequently when a parent goes through the process of having their child identified, they come to realise that a lot of the characteristics and traits that are being discussed by the clinician actually apply to themselves as well. So a lot of parents might have a late realisation that they're ADHD or autistic themselves. And obviously that comes with its own emotional stressors, and they're processing so much. So I think there are so many layers to pull apart there. And I think one of the hardest things is that a lot of people in this world set themselves up to be knowledge gatekeepers. And I try and break that down. I try and share as much knowledge with parents as I can, as much free knowledge as I can with them. The more knowledge they have, the more power they have to be able to manage themselves and to be able to manage what their child needs. But yeah, it's a challenge. It's not easy. It's something that I have dedicated my life to, and hopefully I have a small impact, but I think the biggest impact comes from parents of neurodivergent children being able to support each other when they have that connection that, again, we were talking about earlier, and they find people who they feel a real sense of understanding and empathy, and that can really help and support them.
Thank you so very much, Victoria, for sharing your insights with such passion. And colleagues also are joining me. So you notice how much passion, heart, and mind our practitioners put into the practice that they are creating and the immense value that they are creating. So if you are resonating with any of these practitioners, if you would like to connect with them and potentially even collaborate with them, if you would like to be connected with them, feel free to let me know, and I'm more than happy to connect them with you. And also, I have another announcement to the professional coaches who might be attending today. If you are aware that this session provides you one continued coach education resource development hour, please send me a direct message with your email address and your name in ICF system so that we can send you your CCE 1-hour resource development certification. So now addressing professional coaches, if there is anyone who might be already a professional coach or a person who is interested in becoming like one of those practitioners, as I mentioned, at Ignite Global, we created world's first ever comprehensive child adolescent development and parenting coaching program, which is globally recognized and internationally accredited. If you're interested in exploring possibilities of creating a practice like that and qualifying yourself, feel free to reach out, and Lux is our lead facilitator and she's the one who created this program. Now, considering that we have limited time, I would like to invite our panelists to our final question. And already our panelists provided us with several great insights that we can put into practice. So we understand that parent self-awareness, self-regulation play a very important key role in parenting. So what would be one key insight that you would like to share with our audience today in terms of how co-regulation between parent and the child could foster healthy child development? Let's start with Vicky.
You know, this is my favourite topic, Fernando. So here's the good news and the bad news. And I always say this to all the parents at all the workshops that I do. As an adult, you have a huge ability to impact your child's nervous system. There's a little diagram that I always put up with like nice sums on it with an adult and a child who's regulated and dysregulated. And that little picture, Trick's nodding because he's seen it, shows that a dysregulated adult is always going to have a dysregulated child. If it doesn't have to be your own child, that applies to teachers and professionals and everybody who's anywhere near a child, because a child's nervous system hasn't developed the maturity yet to be resilient towards the dysregulation that is coming out, not through explicit signs, but implicit little signs that we pick up on from the dysregulated adult's nervous system. So that means a few things. It's good news because that means as an adult, you can impact your child in a very positive way by working on your own regulation. One of the best ways to do that is to offer yourself compassion and grace. Parenting is the hardest job in the world, you know, and it doesn't get any easier. Whether you have a neurodivergent child, whether you're a single parent, or whether you have your own family around, you know, like in terms of like grandparents, the extended family, all of those different ways of parenting all come with their own complexities. And I think, as Lux pointed out, people are very, very quick to give parenting advice to you, and you need to develop an ability to kind of let some of that parenting advice or impact of others kind of wash over you, and to focus on being aware of your own nervous system and how you can work to regulate that. And what works to regulate that is very different for different people, and it's all about self-care. By that, I don't necessarily mean going and getting your nails done, although that honestly might work for some people. But the most basic self-care that you can do, that I know everybody has heard 100 times before and sounds absolutely ridiculous, but it's breathing. You know, we all breathe the whole time. But if you actually stop, you would probably and think for a moment, you will probably find that you're not breathing as well as you could most of the time. Maybe because of stress, maybe because of health reasons, maybe because of whatever, but just deep, regular, very functional breathing can have a huge impact on our nervous systems. And it's also a very quick tool that we can use anywhere that we are. As soon as we start to feel dysregulated, we can focus on our breathing, have just even sometimes 30 seconds, a few in and out breaths is enough. Something that I do, and people laugh at me because it's the big kid in me coming out. I was looking around to see if I had one close to me, but I don't have one on my desk at home. I have pots of bubbles. Do you know the bubble water that you can buy very cheaply? And you can blow those bubbles, right? Well, that for me, first of all, I enjoy doing it. I love bubbles. I always have. And secondly, it helps me to control my breathing in a very quick way, because in order to get the most bubbles that I can possibly get, and I kind of set myself a little competition, I have to breathe in a very controlled manner, right? I have to breathe out slowly and very consistently, and I have to empty my lungs. And I literally do that sometimes between clients when I don't have any time to do anything bigger. But yeah, I think for me, the one takeaway I would want everybody, parents, professionals, coaches, it applies to all of us, is to focus on your own regulation first. Because if you're not regulated, then those around you, especially children, can't be. And that's not to say that you have to be perfect at regulating yourself, because that's impossible. You know, it's not about perfection. It's that putting your oxygen mask on before you put it onto the children around you, and just making tiny little changes day after day after day, so you develop new routines that really have that lasting impact.
Excellent,
Thank you.
Victoria. Thank you very much with those final insights. Let's hear from Patrick next.
I love that, this whole idea of self-compassion. You know, isn't that a wonderful like inverse of perfectionism, being able to be compassionate with yourself. So the thing that I would say, you know, I work with people with ideas about how to ground and how to become less reactionary. Okay, or less reactive. There's a lot about that. But what I start every session that I do with people is a review of some of these things that affect your window of tolerance. These things of being able, like, how was your sleep this past week? How was your exercise? How's your connection with other humans? What's your nutrition like? And do you have stress management? If you focus on these things, or just at least kind of look over every week, how am I doing with that? 1 to 10. You're kind of focused on those things that are really critical, foundational for you being able to regulate yourself. And as Victoria said, if you're able to regulate yourself, you're much more likely to be able to regulate your child. Because if you're not regulated, I love the thing that she was talking about too, her image. If you're not regulated, you're always going to dysregulate your kids. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for it. So the main thing I'd say, take care of yourself by looking at your sleep, your nutrition, your connection with other humans, your exercise, and your active stress management. Okay.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for those very practical insights. Looks, over to you.
Thank you, Fernando. Thank you, Vicky and Patrick as well. Now, these are great insights, coaches, and I would like to, coaches and parents, participants, I would like to address this to go a little bit deeper into this topic, because we are talking about key takeaways. And as I myself said, that it's very easy for us to give solutions and advice to parents, do this and do that. And it's easy to provide tools and techniques and models. But what we truly need to understand is, if you are doing something, do it with purpose, do it intentionally for yourself. What I mean by this is that we need to remember that before being a parent, you are first and foremost a person. And I know, because I have seen many parents out there feeling like they are failing, not being not good enough, not doing a good job as a parent. And so they strive to be perfect parents, just like my colleagues mentioned, of course, driven by the profound desire to provide the best possible life for their children. Now, I want to acknowledge some of you, maybe you, when I say you, I really mean you. Some of you parents might be struggling quietly, which is, I think, is very unfortunate. And I want you to remember that, although I don't like to provide people advice, please remember that you are doing the best you can with what you know, and you don't have to be perfect, because no one understands or loves your child the way you do. And you are the right parent for your child. And that connection is so uniquely yours that no one can take that away from you. So you see, it's the match made in heaven, you and your child. So my key takeaway for any parent is, with all the tools, skills, solutions that I can bring and provide you here practically, it's also important that please be kind and gentle to yourself, because it's equally essential for us to turn inward and recognize the parts of ourselves that maybe need healing. Because as I mentioned earlier, parenting is not just about raising a child, it's also about nurturing the child within you. Right? We might not remember our childhood, but we also have a little child living within ourselves. So by addressing your own emotional well-being, your mental health, you not only support your personal growth, whether it's self-regulation or tools or whatever, but you also create a more secure, safe, and resilient environment for your child to flourish and thrive.
Excellent. Thank you, Lux, with all those wonderful insights. There's nothing else I could add because I'm not a child, adolescent, and parenting specialist. So we wholeheartedly accept all the beautiful insights you shared with participants, colleagues, parents, educators. Feel free to leave any message here, how you received this session. And once again, I would like to thank our panelists for being here. Very generously sharing your time and insights, and also all of who's here and co-creating this space with us. Thank you very much for showing up. And in our March webinar, we look forward to discussing how trauma acts as invisible chains and keep us from our own development, our expansion and success. So stay in touch with us, and I look forward to meeting you in March with our next conversation like this, and wish you all a wonderful rest of the day or an evening. And we bring all these insights to our heart, and not only our own children, but we look around and then we recognize the beauty of children and how we are able to create a safe space, especially a space that our kids can be regulated. So of course, very cliche that our next generation, we are handing over our world to a better regulated generation. With that, I would like to thank all of you. Look forward to keeping in touch. Bye for now. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you, Susanna. Good night. Thank you, Vicky. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Lux. Thank you,
Good night,
everyone.
everyone. Thank you so much for the beautiful sharing. So rich. Thank you. Bye. Good night.
Good night.